So for this video, I want to discuss the issue of personality cults. Now, this is something that I think is quite apparent in human nature, and it can actually be found all over the world in different contexts, but nonetheless all over the world. I think it can be subdivided into different sort of categories. So there's political personality cults, which are embodied usually by dictatorships and often in enshrined in law through legislation that is intended to protect the subject. Um, it can be found in sports and in media, and I'm going to try and provide examples with each. I'll say from the outset, I am very, very wary of all personality cults, whoever is the subject. Um, and at the end of the video, I'll speak a bit about why I think this develops and yeah, my own thoughts on it. Firstly, I will say that I totally understand that there are very, very inspiring people, and I think it is part of human nature that we look up to others. Um, there have always been, and there will always be inspiring people. Um, but it's very, very important that we recognize that no human being is perfect. And the thing about personality cults, the nature of personality cults, is it actually takes away the humanity of the person insofar as it puts him on a mantle of perfection, makes him marble-esque, so to speak. So I'm going to break this down into different categories if you bear with me. I think it's very, very important to talk about. I live in a country that has freedom of expression, and there are parts of the world where you simply can't talk about these sort of issues. So I'm going to exercise my right to speak about this partly because I want to myself, but also in a sense to give a voice to those who don't have a voice on this issue. Without exaggerating. Okay, so let's first of all look at the political personality cults. Some examples: Chairman Mao, Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines, um, and in more contemporary times, Kim Jong Un. In fact, the Yuch regime in general, the Yuch dynasty in general, I should say, and in the case of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. I heard recently there was a Turkish truck driver denounced or reported his own wife for insulting the president. So Turkey is definitely heading down a disturbing path regarding the personality cult around Erdogan. Erdogan is without a doubt the most influential or powerful leader since Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. So Turkey, I think Turkey's long had an issue with freedom of expression generally. There is such a concept in Turkey of offending Turkishness, whatever that means, but I think that this is a disturbing trend, and all forward-thinking Turkish people should be concerned about it, and they are, to be fair. Excuse me. In the case of Mao's China, if you have any notion of Chinese history, you'll know in the 1960s there was a period of chaos, known as the Cultural Revolution, a sort of social experiment by Mao. The Communist Party today kind of blames his advisors for that absolute nightmare, and that's what it was. It was a period of complete political chaos. Part of that was something called the 100 Flowers campaign, and I don't want to go too much off on a tangent with this, but it was supposedly a period of liberalization when Mao encouraged critics to come forward. 100 Flowers was supposed to be 100 blooming ideas, but it was basically a trap for his opponents in order to then go on to persecute them. The Cultural Revolution was a complete nightmare. You had situations where teachers were literally beaten to death by their own students, parents were denounced by their children. It was a very dark period, not just in China, but I would argue in human history. And it all centered around Bao. Um, as a cult of personality. So that's some political examples. The next example I'm going to give is quasi political, but it's also connected to monarchy, and that is the situation in Thailand. Without question, the situation in Thailand can only be described as a personality cult, and that is the incredible adulation around King Bhumipol. Now, I've been very closely involved as an outside observer of the situation in Thailand regarding free expression, regarding the draconian lèse majesté laws, and so on. I am very, very respectful of very brave efforts by Thai Republicans to stand against these heinous laws. Basically, if you're not familiar with it, in Thailand, you can go to jail for up to 35 years for perceived insult to monarchy. Doesn't even have to be an actual insult. It's perceived insult, so it is essentially an absolute monarchy. On the surface, it's described as a constitutional monarchy, but it really, really isn't. Um, I live in a constitutional monarchy, and believe me, in Britain, people can insult the Queen, and they're not going to go to jail for it. In Thailand, it's a very, very dangerous situation where neighbors can fall out with each other and accuse each other of lèse majesté. These are very, very vaguely defined laws. It's a very dangerous situation, and I have no doubt that there is genuine reverence of the king, um, but without doubt there is fear behind that as well. There have been Western writers who have got into trouble for writing about this, um, and Andrew McGregor Marshall is an example. He wrote a book called The King Never Smiles. Never, haven't read the book, but I know he was banned from Thailand for it, or I think he faced lèse majesty charges. But basically, for me, it's one of the most glaring examples, and it's a very, very disturbing situation because it produces hysteria. I have personally dealt with Thai royalists. Perhaps this one is more personal for me than any of the other examples I'm going to give, because I personally been at the receiving end of the sort of fanaticism it provokes. I've had death threats by Thai royalists. These are not threats I've taken particularly seriously because there's nothing they can do. Um, but these people are crazy, and I've personally experienced that. Thailand is a good example of just how hysterical a personality cult can get. And the thing is, they get annoyed when you compare it to North Korea. But insofar as the way the king is worshipped is concerned, I don't see a great deal of difference. Thailand is a more open country. It has tourists and so on, but it's definitely headed down a dark path in recent years. Ironically, as Burma has opened up more, Thailand has got worse. It is a military dictatorship, and that is directly endorsed by the king because nothing in Thailand happens without royal approval. Again, it may be a constitutional monarchy, but really it's an absolute monarchy situation. If it was a constitutional monarchy, they wouldn't need lèse majesté laws because every other constitutional monarchy in the world, whether it be the UK or Japan or Spain or Sweden, has freedom of expression. Thailand doesn't. That is a fundamental difference. Um, like I say, I have no doubt the king is genuinely revered by many people, but the fact of the matter is there are many Thais who are also very critical of a monarchy, but they are silenced, threatened, and they cannot openly speak out. They just can't because it is a very dangerous situation over there. In fact, I have to be careful because of the things that I've said in the past. If I'm ever in Thailand, not that I've broken any Thai laws, but because I haven't, but to me, that is a very, very glaring example and a very sinister one because it brainwashes people into hysteria. If you look at videos about King Bhumipol, they're literally seeing him as a living god. And there's one video I came across called "The Perfection of King Bhumipol." And these are not satire; these are actual, literal videos. He's the world's longest serving monarch, as far as I know. Um, Surpassing our own Queen Elizabeth II. Um, I believe he was crowned in 1948. That's 68 years now. Um, and basically, yeah, that's the situation in Thailand. Anyway, I'll move on to the other categories I was talking about. But to me, um, I'll come back to actually to the fanaticism aspect because I just want to lay out the different categories. So that's political, the political factor of things, and it's the worst because that is the sort of category where you actually have legislation, such as the lèse majesté laws in Thailand and these new laws in Turkey, which is makes it illegal to criticize Erdogan. Then you have the sporting world. One prominent example I would give with that is Muhammad Ali, the former heavyweight boxer. Ali is without doubt the world's most famous boxer, um, although Tyson would probably be quite close to that as well, Mike Tyson. Um, Now, with Muhammad Ali, the personality cult is nothing to do with law, but it's more to do with the mentality of a very large segment of boxing fans. What I mean by this is that the videos about Muhammad Ali are basically blind adulation, and you see statements like, how dare this person question Ali, or how dare someone insult Ali? Um, so there is very much a mentality of this man is above critique, and I think that is not just the principle is wrong, but it's wrong particularly in his case because there's many areas where Muhammad Ali can be criticised. He definitely held racist views, which he may or may not have retracted them. I didn't need to do more research on that, but there's no doubt that he did hold racist views. Um, and he trash talked opponents. He had ties to some pretty questionable organizations. And people forget in the 60s and 70s, Ali was a very polarizing figure. Um, but you get a lot of casual boxing fans or hardcore Muhammad Ali supporters who basically treat him like a living god, and I think it's bullshit. I totally understand respect for him as a fighter because, without doubt, he is, if not the greatest, absolutely one of the greatest fighters of all time. So, I have no problem with people acknowledging that fact. And he fought the best of his era, and he beat the best of his era. So I have no problem with that. But he was not perfect either as a fighter or a man, and that's an example within the sporting world. I've made a video I think before specifically about that. In the entertainment world, a good example would be Michael Jackson. What I find interesting is back in the day when the late Michael Jackson was performing, it was all about, oh, Michael Jackson promotes this message of love and tolerance and goodwill to all. And there's no doubt about it, Michael Jackson certainly had a very positive message. But you contrast that with the fanaticism of some of his fans, and I can't think of any other word for it. In the 1996 Brit Awards, when Jarvis Cocker pulled that admittedly childish or crude stunt, he sort of done a Mooney in the middle of Jackson's performance. Now, whatever people think of that, I've mixed views on it. He says he done it because he didn't like Michael Jackson kind of playing God. He thought it was very arrogant of Michael Jackson. Some would say it's disrespectful to another artist, it's childish and all the rest of it. But anyway, he appeared before Westminster magistrates the following day, I assume for some public disorder offence. But there's footage of that from the time showing Michael Jackson fans basically baying for Jarvis Cocker's blood, literally. Like, if there wasn't security there, I have no doubt these female fans would have seriously tried to do him some harm. So that's a contrast to Michael Jackson's message of goodwill. And I often find it interesting that defenders of people who promote a message of goodwill or peace are very often the opposite of their idols. Um, so they don't really learn much from them. Excuse me, I've just have dry lips. So those are some examples within the different categories I've spoken about. Now, what explains this? In the political context, you could say it's the nature of a dictatorship that people don't know anything else, especially in North Korea. In other areas which have had more access to the outside world, it could be fear. And it could also be a genuine hope that the person responsible, a strong man, will bring stability to a troubled nation. Because very often, one of the main defenses of authoritarian rule, and this is very much the case in Egypt right now, is that the strong man in question will bring stability to a troubled nation. And sometimes they do. But the caveat to that is at some point people will have enough of it, and then it's just a vicious cycle. Um, in the case of Thailand, I don't really have any answers for how that developed. I think it's a mixture of Buddhism as well. I think there is a religious aspect to that because I think the religious divinity thing within Buddhism and the monarchy is a very intertwined blend in Thailand. That's my understanding of it anyway, and I'm no expert on this, but it's my outside understanding of it. Also, Thailand is a country that has had far more than its fair share of coups. The monarchy, for right or wrong, has been seen as a stabilizing force. Um, but you know, the attitude that you will hear that all Thais love the king is basically a lie. Certainly, a lot of Thais do. I'm not disputing that, especially around Bangkok. But the fact of the matter is, there are Republican Thais, and they certainly do not love the king. I mean, there is deep, deep corruption in Thailand because this is one of the world's wealthiest royal families, far wealthier, by the way, than the British royal family. And yet, you know, Thailand is not the poorest country in Asia, but it's not a rich country. So there is a massive discrepancy. Another personality cult, incidentally, in that region is Brunei. Sultan of Brunei is an absolute monarch as well, although I'm not as familiar with the situation, except he condoned stoning a while back, which attracted a lot of controversy. Um, in the case of the sporting world and the entertainment world, I think it's because people like someone to look up to. And there's no question about it. Figures like Muhammad Ali and Michael Jackson were extraordinary people. Um, in the case of Ali, he's still alive. So, you know, when you get someone who is an inspiring person, who is outspoken, and I guess this also applies to Donald Trump to some extent, although I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say there's a personality cult around Trump. Um, but, you know, I think that when you get an inspiring person, at least inspiring to their supporters, they simply don't want to hear any critique. So even if it's a case of you try to be neutral or you try to give a balanced approach, say for example with myself, I'm saying that Ali was a great fighter and he was in many ways an exceptional man, and yet he had many, many flaws. The sort of people that I'm talking about would say, "Oh, you're a racist," or you know, "How dare you disrespect Ali," and this sort of thing. It's that sort of mentality I have no time for. And when I hear people come out with comments like, he or she is my idol, I just think I kind of cringe inside. I don't believe in human idolatry whatsoever. Now, I'm not really sending out a boring message here of, oh, everyone's equal and we shouldn't admire anyone. I'm not saying that for a second. There are people that should be admired. You know, they do incredible things, they have great achievements, and it is part of human nature that we look up to others. But I think we need to be very, very, very wary of personality cults, especially when it comes to legislation and the political side of things. In entertainment and sports, it's irritating, but at least there's no legislation around it. So, you know, the worst that's going to happen is you're going to be denounced by their fans. But in the political world, it is downright dangerous because then you end up having a situation where people really are persecuted, as is the case in Thailand, um, and is increasingly is the case in Turkey. And by the way, to some extent in Russia as well, we have Putin youth camps and so on. So this is a phenomenon that can be seen everywhere, really, including in democracies. In democracies, and not such so much from a political aspect, because you will always have a scope for criticism. I mean, in America, people can freely criticize Trump. In the UK, people can freely criticize the Queen. Um, but in democracies, you do get a personality cult around entertainment or sports figures, which I think is when it gets to a point of they're above critique and their fans will pounce in and attack anyone saying anything. That's to me is definitely an unhealthy development. So a final thought: I really, really have no issue with people looking up to people and admiring, inspiring people. I have no problem with that, but I do have a problem with this idea that just because someone is critiqued, then the person doing it should be absolutely pounced on, or the notion that any human being, I don't care who they are, I don't care how good a person they are or how inspiring they are, nobody should be above critique. And that to me is a basic common sense principle. So I know this is a lengthy video, but I do think there were a lot of issues to cover. Let me know your thoughts about personality cults. Thank you.